Live chat show. My name is Jack McLean, and tonight my guest is Simon Adder. He's the founder of Simonster Strength, a calisthenics expert and physiotherapist. Simonster is a world leader in bodyweight training. Started gymnastics at an early age, and he became passionate about mastering control of body and immersed himself in the bodyweight of world strength training. Sorry, my YouTube video just popped up there. Expanding his skill set with training in martial arts, circus, and breakdance, his movements and teachings reflect a mixture of knowledge from each of these disciplines. Really looking forward to this episode. For those new to the show, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals. If you like the show, please show support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Simon. Thanks for jumping on, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Let's dive straight into the beginning of your career as a strength coach and a calisthenics expert. At what age did you recognise that you wanted to help people with their fitness goals?
I think that's something that developed quite late. So I've always been passionate about calisthenics and kind of the high-level motor control exercises that you see in, circus, breakdancing, gymnastics. Mm-hmm. And then as I got older, I thought I wanted to be a physio, and I still am a physio, but now I predominantly work with performance and rather than injury prevention. It's most about people kind of getting the most out of their calisthenics training or strength training.
Awesome. And what about yourself? And in the bio, the intro, there's gymnastics was something you started at a young age. What did a typical week look like, and what age did you start gymnastics?
So I started gymnastics really young. My parents got me into gymnastics probably when I was, I think, 7 or 8. I had an injury there. I ran into some parallel bars and I split my open, and I quit for a few years. And then they got me back into that when I was a little bit older, about 11 or 12, I think.
Yes.
And I always liked gymnastics. I liked the gymnastic skills, but I didn't really like how structured it was, mm-hmm. And how rigid the syllabus was. They also taught breakdancing at the same YMCA that I did gymnastics at. And I went along to a breakdancing class, and I much preferred that. I liked a lot of those skills, and I liked kind of the freedom you had with breakdancing. To me, it was like, it's ultimately gymnastics, but you can kind of take it whichever direction you want to. It's just floor gymnastics, but you can do whatever you want. So that's kind of where I made the switch, and I always did calisthenics to kind of help with my breakdancing performance.
Right, interesting. Okay, so that's that the calisthenics was sort of the accessory work for you, and your goal was the breakdancing. For those new to the gymnastics, calisthenics, and breakdancing, well, what would be a typical day's training involved? Is it a lot of volume? Is it long duration, or is it more an AM session and a PM session? Take us through sort of a typical day.
So as a junior gymnast, you probably do a few sessions a week, maybe 2 or 3 sessions a week, maybe 2 hours. Elite gymnasts train a lot more, kind of all the way up to a full-time kind of training schedule. But as a junior gymnast, you generally do 2 hours. You do a warm-up, you do some skill-specific work on each apparatus, and then you do your last 30 minutes as a kind of strength and conditioning circuit. With breakdancing, it was just one breakdancing lesson a week where you'd kind of learn technique and skills. Mm-hmm. And then you'd kind of be on your own to do the rest of your training on your own. So what I would do is, as I kind of found that I wanted to do that more and more, I would seek out other classes and just kind of try and get a lift with people when I could, or catch a train out to Paran to go to a few classes throughout the week. So once I made the switch to breakdancing, it was generally about 2 or 3 breakdancing lessons a week, and then I would just train at home in my room for about an hour of really skill-specific work.
Right. And is that stuff that you were asking friends? Was there a coach? Did you have sort of influences, or were you sort of self-practicing different drills, that home practice?
There was a little bit of coaching, but a lot of it was self-directed, because you'd have one lesson a week where you'd have a coach who would teach you something, and then you'd practice those drills at home. Breakdancing's fairly new though, and there's always kind of new developments with it, kind of new skills being invented. And once you've been doing it for a few years, you're often working on things that the coaches haven't done or can't do or aren't sure about. So you and your friends just try and work it out together and break down a skill and think about how you'd progress toward that.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your journey into the industry that physiotherapy was an area of education that you undertook. Was that because you had an injury yourself, or were there clients that were you thinking at that time to potentially open up a clinic? Take us through the thought process for physiotherapy.
Yeah, so my first exposure to physio was when I was probably 13 or so. I injured my wrist. So I was doing a lot of breakdancing, a lot of handstands. I got a sore wrist and I saw a physiotherapist. And my mum's a GP, so she's a doctor. She recommended I see a physio, and I was really impressed. I thought he had a really thorough understanding of anatomy and physiology and managing injuries. I thought that would be, I thought that'd be a really fun career. I didn't really have any idea of what I wanted to do at that age. And I also thought a bit of a selfish reason, but I also thought that'd be really good knowledge to have with what I love to do with breakdancing and with calisthenics training. And that's kind of what took me there. I didn't really have a goal to open a clinic or anything like that in mind. And then once I got into the industry, started working as physio, I saw that a lot of it isn't that kind of work. If you work even if you work in musculoskeletal physiotherapy in a private practice, a lot of what you see is not athletes trying to return to high level function. It's more like the general public trying to be able to have a day without pain. And it's not as much of an exact science as a naive 13-year-old Simon thought it was.
Yeah. No, you got to try these things out. I think that's a large part of people listening to the podcast is exploring different things through this journey, and it's probably one element of the fitness industry that is fun, is that we can sort of all learn off each other in different domains. And do you feel, looking back now, that the discipline has, you mentioned trying calisthenics, gymnastics, and how that's evolved into your philosophy, which we'll talk about in a second, but is physiotherapy part of that, or the injury prevention side of things, that part of your programming, or is it something that you pretty much dropped most?
I think rather than thinking of them as like separate disciplines, I think there's a lot of overlap between physiotherapy and strength and conditioning, especially at the low level when it comes to rehabilitation. But physio is something that I'm really happy that I learned. I think it's helped a lot with my training, a lot with my understanding, a lot with being able to pick apart kind of BS on the internet about, this is how you need to do something. Don't do this because you'll get injured. Having that understanding of anatomy, physiology helps a lot to decipher what's of substance and what's just a gimmick.
Yeah. Have a good filter. That's a pretty important thing for a coach. And exploring that, you mentioned the fun element and being able to learn new movements and break down skills. How much of it is increasing if you're trying to get your first chin up or any sort of golf push-ups, dips of the basic level of body weight calisthenics before progressing the skills of development? How important is it to develop strength for, let's just say, using dumbbells and barbell, and how important is it to put time into learning balance and coordination and the skill, sort of the motor learning component of it? Yeah,
I think that's there's not really a one size fits all answer, and it's really dependent on the skill you're trying to pursue. I think most of the skills you mentioned, I'd consider them to have a really kind of low technical component. So I know a lot of people mention that a squat's a really technical exercise, and in the world of powerlifting and lifting weights, it's fairly technical, compared to something like a leg extension. But if you've tried skateboarding, hand balancing, breakdancing, gymnastics, it pales in comparison to something like trying to balance on one hand or trying to spin on your head or trying to coordinate, a backflip with a twist in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to the really highly technical skills, it's pretty obvious. You really need to address the motor learning component. But when it comes to something like a chin up or a push up, as it's quite a simple motor pattern, I think some specific work is important, but it often does come down to just being able to generate raw force output. And a lot of that you can achieve with really basic exercises. You can often unlock your chin up with just building strength through things like lat pull downs, push-ups with any kind of general upper limb strengthening work should help you get there.
Yeah. And let's talk about the business side for a second. Simonster was a brand that, like, I know Monica, my partner, being in the yoga world, and then myself at the time I was CrossFitting. You put those two worlds together, and we're aware of the work you were doing in that space, calisthenics, and that would have been about 5 or 6 years ago. At what point of your career did you find out about the power of the online world, social media, YouTube, and start putting yourself out there? How did that come about?
I started putting myself out there online fairly early. Kind of once I had a camera and was uploading things, I would often get inspiration from breakdancers and power movers, seeing what they could do on the internet before YouTube was even around. So when I could afford one, I bought a camera and started just filming my training and uploading some stuff. And there were a few breakdancing websites where you could kind of see things from other people around the world and get ideas and get inspired, and that's how it started. But I don't think I really understood the power of it until quite recently, and especially through COVID, when the world just kind of went online.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So it was more from your own training development was the focus of sharing videos was part of that community in breakdancing.
Yeah. So when I was younger, my main interest was just trying to kind of push the limits with what I could do in the world of breakdancing, tricking, body weight movement, basically. I was trying to see what I could do on one hand, how many times I could spin on my head, could I do a flip with a twist in it into another skill, all of those sorts of things. And as I've gotten a little bit older, my focus has kind of shifted a lot more to teaching. And I think part of that is that breakdancing is very much a young man's sport, and it's very hard to do things like air flares and head spins indefinitely. But I still very much enjoy training. So my training kind of shifted from the more explosive things and the things that are a lot more stressful on your joints to more traditional strength training, but in the form of bodyweight exercises, because I've always really liked the skill component of bodyweight exercises. And then you go. Sorry to cut you off. And then another thing I've always kind of enjoyed is teaching and breaking things down and trying to have a really deep understanding of the things I do. So now that's predominantly what I do is apply strength science to bodyweight training or calisthenics.
Yeah, that's a good segue for the coaches listening in. Like you mentioned, the motor learning, the complexity of these drills is higher from a movement competency point of view. It's on the other end compared to the basic movement patterns that we typically do, like squats, push-ups, hip hinge, and pulling. Because of that, what sort of cues do you use with when you're giving feedback for some of these movements? Is it is it more external cues? Is it a feel thing? Is it video analysis? Like, what's your favorite way to give feedback when you're trying to progress an athlete that you're working with?
Yeah, as the goal of what I do tends to be performance. I generally don't like internal cues. I think there's a time and a place for them, but when it comes to performance, I think there's a lot of evidence that external cues lead to better performance, and also a lot of evidence that can lead to better strength outcomes. And I found that when people kind of dwell on internal cues, it might work really well for one person, but I don't think it's really generalizable. And I think part of the reason for that is everybody understands things in a slightly different way. Everyone feels things in a slightly different way. And you can't say you should be feeling this working in in your deadlift, you should be feeling your posterior chain activating. And I would say in your deadlift, if you're picking the weight up and standing up and fulfilling the requirements of a deadlift, it doesn't matter if you feel things activating or not, as long as you're making progress. So generally, I like to keep things really simple, focus on external cues, focus on concrete outcomes. I do really like video analysis and video feedback, especially for calisthenics. A lot of the things are really technical, and when people are trying to refine their technique or their alignment, it's really good to just elucidate points and say, if we pause this video here, we can draw some lines on it, and you can see, where or when your center of mass is falling outside your base of support, where you're losing balance, and break down why certain things are happening.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And then, if there is any listeners in that either are trying to get their first chin up or trying to develop that maximum force production, like you mentioned, does it change for the simple cues, simple tasks, or does the process stay very similar?
Yeah, the way I generally break down all skills, just to give a general principle in this, is I think every single skill or every single exercise requires some level of skill, a technique or motor control, just to kind of define what I'm talking about there, and some level of force output. So something as simple as reaching for a glass and picking it up requires a level of skill and competency to be accurate with that and move your hand in the right direction, grip the glass and lift it up, and then some level of force output. And we generally don't even think of that because it's such a small level of force output and requires such little skill. Everyone can already do that, unless you're treating you look at a toddler or you look at a stroke patient. And what I like to do is then break down the strength or the force output and the motor learning requirements, and think about, what do I need to focus on? So often with a push-up, it really is a matter of kind of raw force output. And just to make the point with something even more, even simpler than a push-up, something like an isolated, bicep curl, leg extension, that really is just a function of force output. Almost everyone can coordinate straightening their knee, and raw force output will just basically come down to how much muscle mass you have in your quads. So the way to improve that is just build more muscle. You could do a bit of specific high intensity work, but generally that'll scale really well with muscle mass. So I think of, raw muscle mass as your ability to produce, muscle mass is your ability to produce raw force. And then it's the motor learning component that allows you to put that force into more complex movement patterns or motor patterns. So something like a push-up, relatively easy. People should do pretty well with some push-up regressions, and just building some extra muscle in, the pecs, shoulders, and triceps. Something like a handstand push-up becomes a little bit more challenging. You can have somebody who can overhead press, their body weight or close to their body weight. They've clearly got the force output to do so, but they can't balance a handstand. So where do you go there? And and that's when you would have a lot more work on just balancing a handstand. Then you have these people in the middle who can balance a handstand. They can do a handstand push-up against a wall, but they can't do a freestanding handstand push-up. And in that case, they've got the force output requirements. They can do it against a wall. They've got the balance to do a handstand, but it's really the specific motor learning and lots of really high-level specific practice of that skill of the handstand push-up. So yeah, it's I know that's not too specific to your
No,
question.
That's great. You can see you're a coach. The different clients that are probably popping up and the continuum that you have from, and how you pull it all together and progress someone. How do people typically work with you currently in the business? Is it group coaching? Is it face-to-face? Is it online?
Yeah, most of what I do now is put programs out into the world. I do a few workshops, and I coach a few clients, but not very many. And as most of it's remote, people in other countries, it's basically all online with video review and Zoom calls and that sort of thing.
And who would be the typical client? Is it for those focused on calisthenics? Is it gymnasts that are wanting to explore outside of gymnastics?
It's generally people focused on calisthenics, kind of from all levels. Get a few people that say I've been working for a long time, trying to unlock the chin up. I'm getting some conflicting information online. And other people who really want to hone in on a skill like the planche push up, things like that. And
in your experience over the last, how long have you been in the industry for now? And would you say in calisthenics?
I would say a long time, 10, 15 years, but probably
over a decade.
5 years coaching consistently.
And has it had a huge spike with home practice and because of lockdowns and COVID? Has that increased the awareness?
Oh, sorry, with the online thing. With the online thing, I've probably been in that, 5 years or so. And the huge spike during COVID.
Okay. Yeah. And then now that things are sort of going back to normal and gyms are open, is it people continuing their practice? Are they sort of getting hooked into the sport, the methodology?
If anything, I've seen kind of the opposite. I've seen a lot of people who moved to calisthenics purely because they didn't have access to a gym, especially here in Oz, where you had these really strict lockdowns. A lot of people were trying to, just maintain muscle with calisthenics. But I think a lot of those people also enjoyed, going to the gym. And if I wanted to build muscle and didn't love calisthenics, I'd probably go with the weights option. It's easier to scale. It's easier to target specific muscles. So I think a lot of people kind of made the switch as they were forced to, just to kind of have a way of doing resistance training from home. And now that they have access to a gym again, they're going with the option they prefer more. That being said, there's a few people who kind of fell in love with it and are now doing a lot more calisthenics.
And I know context would be massive with any of these type of questions, but you mentioned planche and developing some of these more complex skills. How long does it take? Talk us through maybe your top 3 movements that you get requested outside of the basic ones of chin up and push up, but more on the complex skills. How long does it typically take someone who's pretty dedicated to give it everything they've got and they follow your program? How long does it take to learn some of these skills?
Yeah, it depends on the skill. I think something like the muscle up is relatively easy. So if you can do a chin up and a dip, or a few chin ups and dips through a good range of motion, you can probably unlock the muscle up in a matter of a month or 2 months for most people. Something like the planche, that's a really long road, and a lot of people who even train for the planche, never achieve a full planche. So I think a good analogy for the planche is probably like, how long will it take me to squat 200 kilos? And for some people, they're a little bit more kind of anatomically designed to be able to squat more. They're bigger, they're heavier, they can squat more. You see kind of parallels with calisthenics, like someone who's 7 foot is probably never going to hold a full planche. Whereas, the smaller guys will get it a lot quicker. Some people will work towards it a lot over the course of years and get close and hold a straddle planche, but never unlock a full planche. But just for a ballpark figure, I generally say skills like if you're coming from a good foundation of body weight strength, like, 10 to 15 chin-ups, 15 to 20 dips, the planche is probably something like 2 years away. The front lever probably a year to 18 months away. And the muscle up you can unlock really quickly.
Oh, thanks for sharing. And you mentioned 5 years ago is when you made that shift to online and then started doing online programming. For those that are thinking about developing an online coaching business, maybe they're doing personal training full time, or they're doing group training, but everything's face to face, and they lost a lot of work during lockdowns and they don't want to experience that again, or maybe they just want a more resilient business model. What were some of your early challenges and how did you overcome them when you shifted to more online?
Yeah, I've actually been really fortunate, and I'm probably not the best person to ask that question to, because I didn't kind of I wasn't kind of forced to make that shift. So the way that kind of came about for me was I had a full-time gig performing. I really enjoyed teaching, breaking skills down, and I was creating a lot of tutorials just kind of as a hobby. And then in response to that, I had some people reach out about coaching and how can I learn this skill. And it's also, calisthenics is a pretty small pool of coaches that kind of specialize in calisthenics. So I was very fortunate in that regard. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any great advice.
I think that's good. That's good advice. Like success leaves clues, and tutorials is a valuable thing that you're giving away. Like you mentioned, it was a hobby project, but people obviously getting something from it and then wanting more and seeking your services. So is that something that was pretty instant once you started the tutorials, or did you have to give away free content for a while?
I gave away free content for a while, and it's something that built. But then again, the goal wasn't really, to get clients. It was just, I really enjoyed doing this. I liked trying to explain how to learn skills in, a simple and concise manner. And I thought it's a kind of gap in the fitness industry. So if I wanted to learn about how to bench press, how to improve my bench press, there's kind of endless resources online, and a lot of great people, a lot of even a lot of research around that area. But if I want to learn how to planche, no one, it's like the blind leading the blind, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was. You had a few resources, but I didn't actually think they were great. So I created a guide about how to planche, some tutorials about how to planche, and kind of the more I created, the more interest I got about coaching and one-to-one kind of paid business in that area. Yeah,
awesome. And when working with your favorite client, what sort of talents or mental capabilities and talents do they have from a physical and mental side? Like, when do you recognize from someone that maybe your first consultation that you think you're going to see some pretty special things from this person?
Yeah, I'm never really sure on a first consultation, because people can say they're really motivated and that they'll train really hard. But generally, if somebody's reached out to me about coaching, paid for a service, they do kind of commit. So I've been lucky to have good clients who've trained really hard. And I generally, it's hard to see how far someone will go straight away and what their potential is. But over the course of the next few months, you can kind of get an idea of what they'll achieve. So I've coached some people from, kind of just kicking up to a handstand to handstand push-ups. A few of the guys are doing straddle planche push-ups now. One of the guys in his 40s is doing rings muscle-ups, bar muscle-ups, holding a flag for 10 seconds. But yeah, you see a lot of variation. The same with strength. You can have someone who's just extremely gifted and can just lift a lot. They get under a bar, kind of no matter what they do, their lifts go up, and you have other people who have to work a lot harder for it.
And does lifestyle come into it as well? If they've got a certain goal, do you say, well, dropping 5 kilos is going to significantly help that goal, or is that something that doesn't come up that often? Usually people come to you, they're already in pretty good shape.
Yeah, they're generally in pretty good shape. I haven't had anyone that I've said, you really should lose weight to achieve this goal. Not that I don't think it's important in certain circumstances, but generally it's just been, quite specific, quite specific work. A lot of people have been kind of in the fitness industry or coaching themselves and really just want to hone in on the calisthenics skills. And that's kind of the way I like to coach, is rather than saying, here's your program, this is what you have to do. It comes down a lot to people's preferences. And a lot of it is talking about the why behind things. So this is why we're doing this exercise. This is why we're doing this intensity, this volume, this order, and discussing concepts along the way. And I think that's really useful, because I think the goal of coaching, or part of the goal of coaching, isn't just to get someone stronger. It's to empower them with the knowledge that they can get stronger indefinitely. So a lot of my coaching relationships are, I might coach somebody for, say, a year, and then I'll no longer coach them, but every now and then they'll reach out with a question and say, hey, can you take a look at this? Here's my progress since I last spoke to you. Or just send me a message and say, hey, just want to show you where my flag is now, that sort of thing. And that's really nice to see.
Yeah, it's amazing what we can do with video now and you can pretty much cope. Like you mentioned, you're working with a lot of people all over the world. You can, the fact you can have the capacity to do that is pretty awesome. From the business owners and coaches out there, do you use Excel? Is it Google Sheets, or is there an app that you use? Take us through the programming side of things.
Yeah, so when I put a template or general program out into the world, that's generally app-based. If I'm coaching somebody one-on-one, I generally will send them a questionnaire and do a Zoom consult, get a history, preferences, goals, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then I generally write up a program with their input on Excel or Google Sheets and make amendments to that over the next, over a training block.
Right. Okay, cool. And then you would catch up with them on Zoom. Is that a monthly thing, or are they just sort of book in as they go?
It depends. I think with calisthenics, it's a lot more useful to have kind of more frequent feedback. Mm-hmm. So I'll often do video feedback weekly. Mm-hmm. But it's very individual. It depends on the person. Mm-hmm. With that being said, I think one issue with a lot of coaches is kind of giving too much feedback. So I try not to do that and just give feedback where is necessary, and just try to guide them in the right direction.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make. Let's dive into that a little bit. Where can that go wrong if you're giving too much feedback from the client's point of view, do you think?
So I think you see this a lot. If you just take the handstand for an example, mm-hmm. I think a lot of coaches make the mistake of giving feedback every rep. And the point I generally use to show that this isn't helpful is I'll just say to that coach, well, okay, just stand on one hand now, and they won't be able to do it. And they might have all the answers and all the tips, and they'll know exactly what they're doing wrong, but they can't balance on one arm. And it just goes to show that no matter what you say, it's not necessarily helping. So for example, if I try and kick up and balance on my left arm, I'm going to fall over. If I have a coach there saying, Simon, you bent your elbow. Simon, you fell to your left. Simon, you did this. I'm like, I know, I'm trying to balance. It's not helping. I just need hours and hours of practice to refine these small, precise movements to be able to correct my balance. And it's not to say that coaching isn't helpful. I think it is extremely helpful, and a coach is really valuable to point somebody in the right direction. I just think providing too much feedback is redundant, not helpful, and I think it often demeans how important repetition and high quality practice is. Yeah,
it's such a great point that you make, both for the athletes listening, but also coaches, I think, because I've definitely fallen in that trap before, especially if you're booking them, one-on-one, and you're not going to see this person for another week. You feel like, I've got to give them the most amount of value and the most amount of help. But like you said, exploring and self-learning is so important, and taking ownership of your practice. But also athletes are going to have awareness themselves. They're giving themselves feedback. So if you're adding more feedback on top of that, it can make it more complex, opposed to the simple philosophy that you talked about, trying to just keep it simple. And then there's that, like you mentioned, I guess you're just sort of steering the ship from time to time, and keeping them on track and being a soundboard, but not overdoing it.
And I think like capacity takes time to build as well. Like you said, Simon, if you look at my bench press technique, there's nothing you can tell me that's going to make me bench press 200 kilos. Or 150 kilos, something that's achievable, but it would take a long time to get there. And a lot of that is just coming down to consistent hard work. And I think a lot of another thing I'll add to that is that a lot of coaches will give what I've found is that I tend to give relatively little feedback compared to other coaches, because I think there's a lot of value in just building capacity. So if you see something like an arched back in the handstand push-up, I think a lot of that is just due to weakness. Somebody can't push up in the hand. Think of the planche or the 90-degree push-up. So you're moving down to horizontal just to make the point a little bit clearer. So if somebody's arching back in the 90-degree push-up and says, Simon, I can't not arch my back. If they've only got one rep, a lot of that just comes down to building capacity. It's likely that they're arching their back because they don't have the strength to do it with a straight back, because that lengthens the lever arm of the body and demands more force from the shoulders. So in that case, you can assess them and see what their motor control of their trunk's like, and whether they can maintain straight body alignment with easier skills, with band assistance, that sort of thing. But quite often it's just like, okay, well, let's get you to 3 reps and then reevaluate. And if you can do 3 reps with an arch back, you can probably do 1 with a straight body, assuming that you have the motor control to maintain straight body alignment. And I think a lot of the time, coaches will kind of chime in too soon and talk about, often make errors like, we need to work on your core. And it's like, no, we just need to build shoulder capacity. And, when you're stronger, you'll be able to do it with a straight back.
Yeah. So you got to give it time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of things correct themselves. And yeah, as I said, it's more like it's more like a compass to direct somebody to a point than an exact map of how to go.
Yes. Yeah. And going back to the basic movement patterns again, you mentioned off air the controversial topic with using bands for movements like developing your first chin up.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on that topic that can be controversial in the industry?
I'd love to. So I think the time you see this is when you have a beginner who's trying to learn a chin up, and you'll see a lot of people online, a lot of well-respected coaches slam band-assisted chin-ups or pull-ups and say, this is a stupid exercise or a useless exercise or an unhelpful exercise, because the assistance that you receive means that the resistance of the movement doesn't match the strength curve of the chin-up. So generally, people are strong at the bottom of a chin-up, they're weaker at the top, and a band will assist more at the bottom and less at the top. And when I hear this, I totally agree with their point about the strength curves, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But I think, okay, if somebody's working toward their first chin up, they probably have a lot of newbie gains to make. And kind of no matter what they do, they should make reasonable progress. And you don't need to make things too complicated. And you certainly don't need to make them fear an exercise or think that an exercise is useless. And I think you actually do a lot more harm by telling them that band exercises are stupid, and kind of they get this paralysis by analysis rather than just putting in work. And if they had just directed that effort to if you just put in hard work and you're doing something challenging and you're making progress, you will achieve your first chin up. Your training doesn't need to be as intelligent as an elite athlete who's close to their ceiling. You can kind of just do anything and it should work.
Just moving the weight plates around the gym.
Yeah, exactly. Just do something hard and test your capacity. And if it's improving over time, what you're doing is working. And I think even with a really, really detailed understanding of strength curves and of exercise science and principles of building strength and hypertrophy, I still think it's a really useful exercise. So the point I used the first point I made is just, it's not good to discourage people from, saying this exercise is bad or stupid.
You want to uplift them.
Yeah, and it's certainly not dangerous. You just want to encourage, you just want to build character as somebody who's starting to train. Just, work hard, push yourself to or close to failure, and increase the difficulty over time. And if you adhere to those principles, that's kind of, most of what you need to do. But even with a good understanding of calisthenics and exercise science, I still think it's useful exercise. And the reason is, firstly, you don't have to pick one exercise. So, if somebody's comparing negatives to band chin-ups, it's like, there's great things about both of them, and why not do both? They're not in conflict. Another thing is, you don't have to match strength curves to build strength. And I think a lot of people who slam band chin-ups don't acknowledge that the resistance in a barbell squat or a barbell bench press don't match the strength curve of the exercise. So nobody says, barbell squats are dumb, it's stupid, it doesn't match the strength curve. You need to do banded or chain squats to build strength. Everyone knows that squats build strength. And when it comes to improving your 1RM, what's better than the specific exercise of the squat?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't acknowledge where that accommodating resistance isn't actually superior, and it can go wrong in the squat if you're just doing band or chain assisted work. So you can add too much weight with the chains and you won't be challenging yourself at the bottom of the squat adequately. So it's, an exercise doesn't need to be perfect to be effective. Band chin-ups can still improve a lot of other things. So they can improve rate of force development. So even if it's not really challenging at the bottom, you can just use a lighter band and just say, use all the power from the bottom to help you get to the top. It's easy to scale. It's simple. You don't need a lat pull down machine. You don't need to hang any fancy equipment or make a harness system. It's better than having somebody spot you, because you can actually get a consistent amount of assistance each rep. You can progress to thinner bands. As you get, if you do an extra rep, it's because you got stronger, not because your coach helped you more or the band helped you more. It provides the same assistance each time. And if you eliminate band assisted chin-ups, it's like, what are you left with that's simple to add a lot of volume? And, you could say, I can do lat pull downs, but, if you're training at home, it's something that's really simple that you can do at higher reps. And if you're just doing negatives, you're leaving that higher reps work out and probably progress. So you're not going to build as much muscle doing singles as you will doing more reps. You're not going to get as much skill practice of actually doing the chin-ups if you're just doing negatives. So, so I think my main problem with it is that it's can be really discouraging to a beginner. But I also don't think exercises need to be perfect to be effective. And I think a lot of people who slam particular exercises have some cognitive dissonance or some
almost missing the point of the whole
double standards. When it comes to other exercises. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, mate. And it's, I guess, common sense isn't that common sometimes. And it's like we talked about before, like everything is a skill at the end of the day, even if it is a simple one. So if you're neglecting the actual movement pattern, how are you expecting to get better at it?
Yeah, I'll actually just make one extra point. I kind of headed in that direction, but didn't complete this train of thought. So I mentioned that, accommodating resistance can actually be harmful. So take the example of improving your 1 rep max squat. So accommodating resistance isn't really better for improving 1 rep max squat, because you're still challenging the sticking point of the squat to the same degree. So, the sticking point of the squat is relatively close to the bottom. Chains are just going to kind of build superfluous strength higher up in range, and not challenge that point more than a standard squat. And in fact, if you mess the assistance up, the accommodating resistance up a little bit, you mess the weight on the chains up a little bit, you won't be challenging that portion as much. So, let's say the challenging part or your max squat out of the hole is like 100 kilos, but you can squat like 150 for a quarter squat, and you just put a ton of weight on with chains. It's all chains. And at the bottom of the squat, you're only doing 80. It doesn't have the same stimulus for strength gains at that point as just doing, 100 kilos. And I think this is something that people neglect to realize when it comes to band assisted chin-ups, because if the part that you're failing with is the top, the band assisted chin-up is great, because even though this part's easy, there's going to be less assistance, and therefore it's going to be challenging that sticking point, the part you really need to build strength. And if you had assistance that worked in the other direction, and you had not much assistance at the bottom and it was really hard, and then too much assistance at the top and it was really easy, you're going to build superfluous strength down the bottom, and you're not going to adequately challenge the top part where you need it to unlock your first chin-up. So I think
which you do see a bit of that with people's first chin-up, is getting that actual chin above the bar can take some time.
Exactly. And a band chin-up is great, because even if this part's easy, it's still challenging that portion. As long as it's challenging, that's going to be probably the hardest part. So I think, just back to that point of like, a lot of people will just make one point that might sound intelligent, at face value. But when you dig a little bit deeper, you realize that, things don't need to be perfect to be effective.
Mm-hmm. And what about in your own journey? What are some of your favorite ways to develop your philosophy over your time? Is it reading books, reading research, listening to podcasts, YouTubing? What are some of or speaking to other practitioners? What are workshops? Talk us through.
I think probably my favorite resource. I get no endorsement from them. I just use their resource, and I find it really valuable. Is MASS, so monthly applications in strength sports. So Greg Knuckles and co doing that. I find that really valuable. So I subscribe and I try to use that to kind of keep up to date with the strength science research. I like to read generally more academic kind of articles and resources. So occasionally I'll read articles outside of that, things that friends send me, things that pop up on social media that I want to dig a little bit deeper with. But yeah, probably the main thing, most consistent thing is that the MASS resource.
We'll add a link for those listening in, potentially you're podcasting in your car. We'll add a link in the show notes so you can refer to that later on. But we'll go to the coming to the close now, mate. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your philosophy with calisthenics development and coaching, as well as your own training and what's worked well for you. We'll go into the personal side, mate, of the podcast, the Get to Know Simon segment. So the first one is, which movie or TV series has impacted you the most and why? We can throw books in there as well.
Books. Okay. Yeah, I can tell you books. I would say the book, when it comes to books, Free Will by Sam Harris was probably my favorite book. I don't know if you've read that, but that can be a little bit, that can cause a little bit of distress for some people, but I found it really valuable, and I think it's got really useful moral implications.
Okay.
Another book of his is The Moral Landscape. That's really good. For movies, none come to mind, but I like Tarantino movies. I like Fight Club. When you mentioned that question, the first thing that came to mind with TV shows, the one that's impacted me the most would be Game of Thrones, because I thought the ending was terrible, and I was just so gutted that I'd made such a huge investment watching this show for so long, and it felt so let down at the end.
It is a big investment. It's good. That's a good point. I actually have forgotten the ending now. It feels like a while ago. It's been a few Netflix
That's the
series.
best way. That's I wish I could forget the ending.
I think there is a feeling of, there must be another series coming or something.
Yeah. How about you? What's your favorite movie or TV show or book?
I would say, recently the Michael Jordan documentary was pretty good on Netflix. That was pretty impressive. And I always loved your Lord of the Rings, Gladiator type, feel good, inspiring movies as well. So that'd probably be my favorite couple that spring to mind. Favorite inspirational quote or life motto?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head in terms of, I'm not a big quotes person. I actually heard, just to follow on from what we were talking about earlier, I heard, I don't know where the term originated or if it originated with him, but on a Greg Knuckles podcast, Stronger by Science podcast, I heard him talking about, not chasing the ghost of optimal, because you'll never really know where optimal will be. And if you ever got there, you wouldn't actually know that you've achieved optimal. So, you're better off kind of chasing progress or chasing improvement rather than perfection. And I think that's a really good quote that's kind of related to the things that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Otherwise,
process driven.
Yeah. Otherwise, kind of, I think simplicity is a really good value. So I'm thinking of Occam's razor, which is, if something simple adequately explains something, kind of choose the simplest path rather than rather than adding extra assumptions in. So I've kind of butchered that razor, but it makes the general point.
Yes. Yep. Okay. And then what about in your work life? What are your pet peeves? What makes you angry? Late clients?
Much.
No?
No, not much. I think I've been pretty lucky in my work life. Everyone's pretty good and, pretty upfront when they, don't do something or can't do something. How about you? I'm going to throw the same questions back at you. Give me a quote and give me
I think as I'm getting longer in the in working in the gym world, I think not putting your gear away is at first that never really seemed to bother me, but I think I do see that as a pet peeve now if you don't put your own equipment back.
Yeah. I think that's very much a written and unwritten rule. Like rack your weights.
Rack your weights, and I think that's probably one that springs to mind. And that probably goes to just showing respect for others.
Yeah.
Favorite holiday destination in a COVID-free world?
I really like Japan.
Yep.
Yeah, Tokyo, Osaka. I love the culture there, the people there.
Yeah. And what about also in a COVID-free world, which we're pretty much in now, favorite way to spend your day off?
I really like training. Yeah, training with friends. Some of my best memories are, training with friends.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Simon, for jumping on and sharing with us, your journey. For those interested in finding out a little bit more or maybe hitting you up with a question, where can people find you?
The website's simonsterstrength.com. So Simon, STER, strength.com. And the same handle on social media, on Instagram.
We'll add them in the show notes, guys. And what's on for the rest of the year, mate? What are you excited about for the rest of 22?
I'm going to head to Vegas for a few months.
You're saying you were performing there last year, was it?
Yeah, or before COVID. And then later in the year, I'll be teaching a workshop, Nirvana Strength in Bali. So a calisthenics workshop with some other calisthenics guys. So that should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's good to hear Bali's back on the map for Australians again. People are going over there. So that will be awesome fun. Is that booked out, or can people still book in for it?
I'm not sure if they've even announced it yet, but I think it's confirmed, and they should announce it soon. So that should be in October. And you will be able to find details about that through Nirvana Strength. So their website, social media.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, we'll add links. Yeah, we'll add all the links, guys, that's been mentioned in the show notes. Thank you for everyone that's tuned into this live show as well. If you tuned in late, it will live on our YouTube channel, so you can, and I definitely recommend watching it from the very start. Simon's kindly offered us some good gems all the way through from the very beginning. So, and if you prefer to listen in the podcasting world, this will be released next Tuesday on our podcast. You can listen in your favorite podcast directory. And our next live chat will be next Friday, the 17th of June, and that will be with Stephen Kelly, who's Head of Development at the Sydney Swans Academy. I'll see you guys then. Thanks again, Simon.